Welcome to Mystery Manor Tales. I'm your host, Evelyn Whitaker. Pull up a cozy chair, perhaps with a cup of tea in hand, and settle in for a long, intriguing journey into the world of classic mystery. Today, we're embarking on an original tale inspired by the Queen of Crime herself, Agatha Christie. It's called The Vanishing Countess of Blue Harbour, a Hercule Poirot death case. This is a locked-room whodunit set in the misty 1920s on a secluded country estate overlooking the fictional Blue Harbour in England's rugged coastline. We'll unfold it chapter by chapter, with all the twists, red herrings, and brilliant deductions you could hope for. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a mystery. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Is it a rainy evening in London, or a sunny afternoon in New York? Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blue Harbour Manor. The fog that morning was the colour of old pewter, thick enough to muffle the clop of hooves on Baker Street, and to turn the gas lamps into trembling halos. Inside the elegant flat at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat in a bergère chair upholstered in bottle green velvet, his small feet in patent leather shoes resting on a petit-point stool. A cup of tisane, chamomile and verbena, brewed to the precise temperature of 78 degrees Celsius, steamed gently on the lacquered tray beside him. The great detective's moustaches, waxed to symmetrical perfection, caught the firelight like polished ebony. He was, for once, at peace. The case of the Maharaja's ruby had concluded the previous week, the gem restored, the thief, a disgraced equerry, dispatched to Wormwood Scrubs, and Poirot's little grey cells allowed a brief sabbatical. He turned the page of L'Étampe, savouring the rustle of newsprint, when the door burst open with the force of a minor cyclone. Captain Arthur Hastings, tall, broad-shouldered, cheeks flushed from the stairs, stood brandishing an envelope as though it were Excalibur. "Poirot, old man, you'll never guess what the post has brought." Poirot lowered the newspaper with the slow dignity of a curtain descending on a West End stage. "Hastings, mon ami, you enter like the north wind. Sit, breathe, and then, if you please, enlighten me." Hastings obeyed, though his knees bounced with suppressed excitement. He slid the envelope across the tray, heavy cream stock, embossed with a crest, a stylized wave breaking against a cliff, beneath it the motto in profundis salus. The flap was sealed with scarlet wax impressed by the same crest. "Blue Harbour Manor," Hastings announced. "Devonshire coast. The Countess Eleanor Vorskova requests the honour of your presence for a house party this coming weekend. She says, well, read it yourself." Poirot broke the seal with a silver letter opener shaped like a miniature rapier. The notepaper carried a faint scent of tuberose and salt. The handwriting was bold, continental, the ink a deep indigo. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive the intrusion upon your well-earned repose. A matter of utmost delicacy compels me to seek the counsel of the finest mind in Europe. Strange occurrences plague Blue Harbour Manor. Objects vanish, footsteps echo where none should walk, and I fear a design upon my life. I dare not trust the local constabulary with subtleties they cannot comprehend. Come, I implore you, before the tide claims what little peace remains to me. Your obedient servant." Poirot folded the letter with geometrical precision. "In profundis salus, in the depths, salvation. A curious motto for a cliff-top estate. And the Countess, she is?" Hastings needed no prompting. He had already devoured the society pages. Russian émigré, married the late Earl of Blue Harbour in 1919, fled St. Petersburg with a king's ransom in Fabergé and Romanov jewels, literally smuggled them out in a child's doll, they say. The Earl died 3 years ago in a hunting accident. Since then, the Countess has turned the manor into a sort of museum of the uncanny. Seances, spirit photography, a library of forbidden texts. Tongues wag, of course. Of course, Poirot echoed, eyes glittering. And tongues, Hastings, are often the hinges upon which truth swings. We shall go. The journey southwest was a tapestry of changing landscapes. They took the 11:15 from Paddington, a first-class carriage smelling of cedar and fresh linen. Hastings buried himself in the Times, occasionally reading aloud snippets about the latest Wall Street flutter or the Prince of Wales's polo scores. Poirot gazed through the window, watching hedgerows give way to rolling downs, then to the wilder moorland, where gorse blazed gold against the slate sky. At Exeter St. David's, they changed to a local branch line, a single carriage pulled by a wheezing tank engine. The guard, a whiskered veteran, greeted them with the reverence due to Poirot's reputation. "Blue Harbour, sirs. Mind the gap. Platforms slippery with brine. The sea's only a stone's throw from the rails down there." The final miles were a slow, hypnotic crawl. Through the window, the travellers glimpsed the harbour itself, a crescent of gunmetal water cupped by jagged cliffs, whitecaps hurling themselves against the rocks like suicidal ghosts. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries thin and mournful. Then the train rounded a headland, and Blue Harbour Manor revealed itself. Imagine, dear listener, a house that seems to grow out of the cliff rather than stand upon it. Gothic to its marrow, turrets, gargoyles, windows of bottle glass that fracture the light into emerald and amethyst shards. Ivy clung to the stone like desperate fingers. A gravel drive swept in a grand crescent, terminating at a porte-cochere where a Rolls-Royce Phantom II waited, its silver lady gleaming. Beyond the manor, formal gardens terraced down to the cliff edge. Beyond those, the sheer drop to the churning sea. A liveried footman, tall, gaunt with the pallor of one who rarely sees daylight, relieved them of their valises. "Welcome to Blue Harbour, gentlemen. Her ladyship awaits in the Winter Garden." They passed through an entrance hall that could have swallowed a modest London townhouse. Suits of armour stood sentinel. A chandelier the size of a small carousel dripped Bohemian crystal. The air carried salt, beeswax, and something faintly metallic. Ozone, perhaps, from the storm brewing over the water. The Winter Garden was a glass-domed annex jutting over the cliff, filled with palms and orchids that seemed to drink the sea mist. In its centre, beneath a bower of night-blooming cereus, stood the Countess Elena Voskova. She was taller than Poirot had expected, clad in a gown of midnight blue velvet that shimmered like the harbour at dusk. A single strand of pearls, each the size of a thrush's egg, circled her throat. Her hair, black as a raven's wing, was coiled in an elaborate chignon secured by a diamond aigrette. But it was her eyes that arrested, the colour of winter seas. And in their depths, a flicker of something between fear and defiance. "Monsieur Poirot." Her voice held the faintest trace of a Slavic lilt, like frost on glass. "You honour me." She extended a gloved hand. Poirot bowed over it with courtly grace. "Madame la Comtesse, the honour is mine, and this is my friend Captain Hastings, without whom I am but a brain without legs." Hastings flushed, murmured pleasantries. The Countess's smile did not reach her eyes. "Come, tea is laid in the Chinese salon. We may speak freely there." The Chinese salon was a confection of lacquer and silk, hand-painted wallpaper depicting cranes among lotus, ebony cabinets inlaid with mother-of-pearl, A lacquered screen that concealed, Poirot noted, a discreet door. A samovar hissed gently on a sideboard. Beside it, porcelain cups thin as eggshell. As they sipped l'absinthe souchong, the Countess spoke with careful deliberation. 3 weeks ago, my sapphire parure vanished from a locked safe in this very room. The combination is known only to me. No signs of forced entry. Then footsteps in the west wing, always at 3 a.m., though the corridor is carpeted and every guest accounted for in their beds. Last night, she hesitated, fingers tightening on her cup. Last night, I woke to find my bedroom door ajar, though I had bolted it myself. On the threshold lay a single white camellia. They do not grow on this coast. Poirot set down his cup. And the camellia, madame? What significance? In St. Petersburg, white camellias were left by the Okhrana as a warning. Your time is ending. Her laugh was brittle. Superstition, perhaps, but I have learned not to dismiss omens. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Have you informed the police? Inspector Croft is adequate for poachers and drunkards. He suggested rats for the footsteps and a careless maid for the jewels. I require subtlety, Monsieur Poirot. Discernment. Poirot leaned forward, elbows on knees. Then permit me to meet the members of your household. A puzzle is only as strong as the pieces that compose it. The Countess inclined her head. Dinner is at 8. Until then, Graves will show you to your rooms. The butler, Graves, was a study in sepulchral efficiency. 50-ish, ramrod spine, eyes the colour of wet slate. He led them up a staircase wide enough for a regiment. Along a gallery lined with ancestral portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow. Poirot's suite overlooked the harbour. The windows rattled faintly in the rising wind. A fire burned in the grate, and on the mantel stood a porcelain figurine of a ballerina, Pavlova perhaps, poised in mid-arabesque. Hastings's room adjoined. As Graves withdrew, Hastings whispered, "Gives me the creeps, that fellow, like an undertaker's apprentice. Observe, Hastings, do not judge. The perfect butler is a blank page upon which others write their secrets." At 7:30, Poirot and Hastings descended for pre-dinner drinks in the long gallery. The guests had assembled, and what a tableau they presented beneath the flickering sconces. Victor Langford, the Countess's nephew and heir presumptive, lounged against a suit of armour, a cigarette dangling from languid fingers. Early 30s, film star handsome, but with the faint bloat of dissipation. His evening clothes were faultless Savile Row, yet the knot of his tie was fractionally askew, a detail Poirot filed away. Lady Beatrice Harrington, dowager widow of a baronet, perched on a chaise like a malevolent parrot. Her gown was acid green taffeta, a lorgnette swung from a diamond chain. She had the reputation of collecting antiquities and grudges in equal measure. Dr. Elias Thorne, the family physician, stood apart, swirling brandy in a balloon glass. Tall, saturnine, with a scar that ran from left ear to jaw, souvenir of the Boer War, or so rumour claimed. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked ceaselessly over the company. Miss Clara Voss, the Countess's secretary, hovered near the fireplace. 25, pale, with ash-blonde hair pinned severely. Her gown was modest grey silk, but Poirot noted the quality of the fabric, expensive, yet worn with the restraint of one who must count pennies. Colonel Reginald Blackwood, retired Indian Army, bristled with martial vigour. His moustache was a masterpiece of the waxing iron. His chest glittered with miniature medals. He was the Countess's financial adviser, and his joviality seemed a touch forced. Graves circulated with a silver tray of cocktails, sidecars, martinis, something vivid green that Hastings eyed dubiously. conversation was a brittle veneer. The weather, the latest review at the Palladium, the scandal of Mrs. Simpson. Beneath it, currents swirled. Poirot sipped his sirop de cassis and observed. Victor's gaze lingered too long on the Countess's pearl choker. Lady Beatrice's lorgnette swept over Clara with reptilian disdain. Dr. Thorne's fingers drummed a silent tattoo on his glass. The Colonel's laughter boomed a fraction too late. At 8, Graves announced dinner. They processed into the dining room, a cavern of mahogany and candlelight, where a long table glittered with Georgian silver and Royal Doulton porcelain. The centrepiece was a silver épergne overflowing with hothouse fruits and, curiously, white camellias. The Countess presided at the head, Poirot to her right, Hastings to her left. As the first course, consommé Olga, was served, she leaned toward the detective. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "I will show you the scene of the sapphire theft. Tonight, observe, someone in this room wishes me harm." Poirot inclined his head. "Rest assured, madame, the eyes of Hercule Poirot miss nothing." Chapter 2. The Scream in the Locked Room. The dinner had been exquisite, and exhausting in the way only a meal laced with unspoken malice can be. Consommé Olga had given way to sole in a champagne velouté, then roast grouse with bread sauce and juniper berries, and finally a charlotte russe that trembled like a guilty conscience. The wines, Chateau d'Yquem with the fish, a robust Burgundy with the bird, had flowed with the generosity of a hostess determined to keep tongues loose and tempers dulled. Poirot, who drank only water tinted with sirop de cassis, had watched every glass lifted, every flicker of expression. He noted that Victor Langford's hand shook when he reached for the decanter, that Lady Beatrice Harrington's lorgnette had never once lowered from the Countess's throat, that Dr. Thorne's scar whitened whenever the conversation veered toward accidents on the cliff path. At 10:30, the Countess had risen. The candlelight caught the pearls at her throat and turned them into a noose of light. "My friends," she said, her voice clear but threaded with fatigue, "the storm grows fierce, and I am not as young as I once was. I shall bid you good night. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, your rooms are prepared in the East Wing. Graves will light your way." A murmur of polite protest. Victor's too loud, Colonel Blackwood's too hearty. The Countess smiled, a smile that did not reach her eyes, and swept from the room in a rustle of midnight velvet. The party fractured. Lady Beatrice declared her intention to consult the cards in the library and sailed off, green taffeta crackling like rifle fire. Dr. Thorne muttered something about checking his medical bag and vanished toward the service stairs. Clara Voss, the secretary, hovered a moment, then slipped away with the silent efficiency of a shadow. Victor lingered at the table, pouring himself another brandy. "Care to join me, gentlemen? Nightcap. The cellars here are legendary." Poirot declined with a courteous inclination of the head. Alas, the little grey cells require clarity, not inebriation. Come, Hastings, we too shall retire. The East Wing corridor was a tunnel of oak and candle smoke. Graves moved ahead of them, the flame of his candelabrum throwing grotesque shadows that capered across the wainscot. Portraits of long-dead Voshkovas glared down, admirals with telescopes, countesses with lapdogs, a boy in a sailor suit who had drowned at sea in 1893. Graves paused before a door of polished walnut. "Your suite, Monsieur Poirot. Captain Hastings adjoins. The bell pull summons me at any hour." His voice was as flat as the Devon tide at ebb. Inside, Poirot's room was a study in restrained opulence. A four-poster bed swagged in damask the colour of clotted cream, a writing desk of burr walnut, a fireplace where applewood logs hissed and spat. A single camellia, white, funereal, lay on the pillow. Hastings, entering behind him, stopped short. "Good Lord, another one!" Poirot lifted the flower with thumb and forefinger as though it might bite. The stem had been cut with a sharp blade. A bead of sap, sticky as blood, clung to the wound. "Placed here after the room was prepared," Poirot murmured. "The maids finished at 6. Someone entered between then and now." He crossed to the window. It was a casement of leaded panes, bolted from within. Beyond, the storm raged. Rain slashed sideways, lightning stitched the sky in violet thread. The cliff dropped sheer to the rocks below. No balcony, no ivy thick enough to climb. Hastings shivered. "Jolly creepy, if you ask me. Think it's the same joker who left the one on her threshold." "Précisément. And the joker, Hastings, is bold. To enter the room of Hercule Poirot under the nose of the household." He placed the camellia in a crystal tumbler of water on the mantel. A calling card, a challenge. They parted with a quiet good night. Hastings's room was a mirror image, save for a small balcony that overhung the cliff. He opened the French doors briefly, letting in a gust of salt and ozone, then bolted them again. Poirot performed his nightly ritual with the precision of a priest. Moustaches brushed, pyjamas of finest silk donned, a final tisane brewed on a spirit lamp. He set his pocket watch to the exact second, 11:57 p.m., and placed it on the nightstand. The storm was a living thing now, shaking the manor to its bones. Thunder boomed directly overhead. The window panes rattled like teeth. Poirot lay in the vast bed, eyes open, listening. At 11:59, the house settled into a hush broken only by the wind. At midnight the scream came. It was not a cry of fear. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two. High, keening, cut off as abruptly as a knife through silk. It came from the west wing, the Countess's private apartments. Poirot was out of bed before the echo died, slippers whispering across the rug. Hastings burst through the connecting door in his dressing gown, hair on end. "Poirot! That was La Comtesse! Come!" They spilled into the corridor. Doors flew open like petals in a gale. Victor Langford appeared in shirt-sleeves, brandy flask still in hand. Lady Beatrice, a vision in a peach silk wrapper, clutched a candle that guttered wildly. Dr. Thorne, fully dressed, medical bag swinging, was already halfway down the hall. Clara Voss stumbled out, barefoot, a shawl clutched to her chest. Colonel Blackwood bellowed for Graves, who materialized as if conjured, lantern aloft. The west wing corridor was narrower, carpeted in crimson Wilton that swallowed footsteps. At its end stood the Countess's door, solid oak, iron-bound, with a heavy brass lock and 2 sliding bolts on the inside. A small brass plaque read, "Comtesse Helena." Poirot reached it first. He seized the handle and rattled it, locked. The bolts were shot home. He could see their ends through the gap. "Madame!" he called, voice sharp. "Madame, répondez!" Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of something heavy falling. A chair, perhaps, followed by a muffled thud. Victor pounded on the door with his fist. "Aunt Helena, open up!" No answer. Colonel Blackwood shouldered forward. "Stand aside, man. We'll break it down." Poirot raised a hand. "Attendez. First, we establish facts." He knelt, peering through the keyhole. The key was in the lock on the inside. Beyond, candlelight flickered. He glimpsed the edge of a canopied bed, a silk counterpane the colour of spilled Merlot, one slipper lying on its side. But no movement. Hastings pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. Not a breath. Dr. Thorne's scar stood out livid against his skin. She may be injured. We must enter." Graves produced a ring of keys, but none fit the modern Yale lock the Countess had installed herself. "The bolts, sir. They can only be drawn from within." Lady Beatrice gave a short, hysterical laugh. "Then how, pray, do we get in? Fly through the keyhole." Poirot straightened, eyes glittering. "We do not fly, we force. Hastings, the fire-axe from the hall stand." Hastings sprinted and returned with the axe, a wicked thing with a red-painted handle. Colonel Blackwood took it, muscles bunching beneath his dressing gown. "On my count," Poirot said. 1, 2, 3. The axe bit into the oak beside the lock. Splinters flew. A second blow shattered the Yale mechanism. A third snapped the lower bolt. The door shuddered but held. "Again!" Poirot urged. On the fifth strike, the upper bolt sheared. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, revealing chaos. The Countess's bedroom was a tempest in miniature. The bedclothes were dragged half to the floor. A crystal vase lay shattered, water and white camellias strewn like casualties. An armchair was overturned. The fire in the grate had burned low, casting long shadows that writhed across the tapestried walls. But the Countess was not there. The room was empty. Poirot stepped inside, his slippers crunching on broken crystal. The windows, 2 tall casements, were bolted from within, the curtains undisturbed. A dressing table stood against one wall, its mirror reflecting the scene in fractured pieces. On it, a silver-backed hairbrush, a bottle of l'Heure Bleu, a single pearl earring glinting like a tear. Hastings gaped. "She's gone, vanished, but how?" The others crowded in behind him. Victor's face was chalk white. "This is madness. She was here. We all heard. Silence!" Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. He moved with the precision of a surgeon, examining every detail. The key remained in the lock on the inside. The bolts, both, were still thrown, though the lower one hung loose where the axe had struck. The windows latched tight, no scratches on the paintwork, no mud on the sill. The chimney was too narrow for a cat, let alone a woman. He knelt by the bed. The sheets were warm to the touch, the indentation of a head still visible on the pillow. A faint scent lingered, tuberose and something sharper. Chloroform. Dr. Thorne opened his bag, withdrew a stethoscope, and listened futilely at the mattress. "No heartbeat, no body. This defies reason." Clara Voss began to cry, soft, hiccuping sobs. "She was alive an hour ago. I helped her undress. She locked the door herself. I heard the bolts." Poirot's gaze swept the room and settled on the fireplace. The fire screen had been moved aside. A faint smear of soot marred the hearthrug. He crouched, touched it, still warm. "Someone was here," he said quietly. "Recently, but not the Countess." Lady Beatrice clutched her wrapper. "A secret passage? These old houses are riddled with them." Poirot tapped the walls, the floorboards, solid. He opened the wardrobe, a cavern of gowns and furs, but no panel budged. Victor sank onto the edge of the bed, head in hands. "She's been taken, kidnapped. We need the police. But first, we search the house. Every room, every closet. Graves, rouse the staff. Hastings, the cliffs. Take lanterns. The storm is fierce, but if she was carried out..." They scattered like startled pheasants. Poirot remained, alone in the locked room that was no longer locked. He stood in the centre, eyes closed, letting the little grey cells dance. The scream, the thud, the warm bed, the camellias, the soot. He opened his eyes and crossed to the dressing table. The single pearl earring, its mate was missing. He lifted it to the light. On the back, a tiny engraving, E.V., the Countess's initials. But the pearl was cracked. a hairline fracture running through it like a vein. Poirot slipped it into his pocket. Chapter 3. The grey cells stir. The storm had spent itself by 4 o'clock, leaving only a steady, mournful drizzle that dripped from the gargoyles and turned the gravel to wet slate. Inside Blue Harbour Manor, every lamp blazed. Footsteps echoed along corridors, doors slammed, voices rose and fell like gulls fighting over scraps. Hercule Poirot had not slept. He stood in the Countess's bedroom, now a crime scene in all but name. His small figure immaculate in a dove-grey morning suit, the pearl earring with its hairline crack nestled in a silk handkerchief in his breast pocket. The little grey cells he had told Hastings required fuel. A pot of chocolate so thick the spoon stood upright, and silence. Silence was in short supply. Victor Langford paced the rug like a caged leopard, hair dishevelled, eyes bloodshot. "We've searched every inch. Cellars, attics, the boathouse. She's not in the house. She's not on the grounds. The cliff path is a mire. No footprints but ours." Lady Beatrice Harrington sat wrapped in a sable coat despite the fire, her lorgnette dangling like a noose. "Then she flew," she snapped. "Or perhaps the smuggler's ghost carried her off. This house is cursed." Dr. Elias Thorne knelt by the hearth, examining the soot smear with a magnifying lens. "Warm an hour ago. Someone crouched here. Small boot, narrow heel, not the Countess's." Clara Voss, the secretary, hovered in the doorway, eyes swollen. She had changed into a plain navy frock, but her hands still trembled. "I heard nothing after the bolt slid home. Nothing until the scream." Colonel Blackwood, fully dressed in tweeds, barked orders at the footman. "Check the tunnels again. There's a shaft behind the wine cellar. Boarded up since 23, but boards rot." Graves, the butler, stood motionless by the wardrobe, face carved from granite. Poirot noted the faintest tremor in the man's left hand, parked perhaps since the war. Hastings burst in, raincoat dripping. "Nothing on the cliffs, Poirot. The tide's come in. Any mark would be gone. But the boathouse. Door was unlatched. A dinghy's missing. Could she have? No." Poirot's voice cut through the clamour. The Countess did not walk out in her nightgown, launch a boat in a storm, and vanish. We deal with artifice, not suicide. He raised a hand, and the room stilled as if a conductor had lifted his baton. "Écoutez, we establish facts. Fact 1, the Countess retired at 10:37 p.m. I noted the time on the mantel clock. Fact 2, Miss Voss heard the bolts at 10:41. Fact 3, the scream at midnight precisely. My watch is synchronized with Greenwich. Fact 4, the door was locked, bolted, key within. Fact 5, the room is empty, yet the bed is warm, the fire tended. Fact 6, a camellia on my pillow, another here by the hearth. Fact 7, soot, a small footprint, a cracked pearl." He paced, hands clasped behind his back. "Now, we reconstruct. The Countess undresses, slippers, robe, pearls removed. She drinks." He lifted the bedside carafe. A faint sediment swirled. "Tisane de Tilleul, linden blossom. A sedative. Dr. Thorne." Thorne sniffed, touched a drop to his tongue. "Valerian, yes. Strong dose. She would sleep. Deeply within 20 minutes. Parfait. She locks the door, bolts it, places the key. Where?" Clara pointed to a porcelain dish on the dressing table. "Always there. She was creature of habit." Poirot nodded. "She climbs into bed. The fire is banked. Someone did that after she slept." Then he gestured to the overturned chair. "A struggle? Or staged? The scream? Not hers, I think. A mimicry. Someone wished us to believe she woke in terror." Victor exploded. "You're saying she was taken from a locked room? By whom? The Invisible Man? By someone with access, mon neveu. Someone who knew the bolts, the key, the sedative. Someone who left a camellia as signature. At 6:30, Inspector Croft arrived from the village, portly, moustached, smelling of wet wool and disbelief. He surveyed the room with the expression of a man who has bitten into a sour apple. "Locked room, eh? Seen it in penny dreadfuls? Probably a secret panel. These old houses." Poirot's smile was thin. "Inspecteur, the walls are solid stone, the floorboards oak, the chimney a child could not ascend. No panel, no trap, yet the lady is gone." Croft scratched his head. "Then she walked out herself. Sleepwalking, ladies do, you know." "Leaving the door bolted from within. The key inside?" "No." The inspector sighed. "Right. Statements then, one at a time." They gathered in the library, an octagonal room lined with leather-bound tomes and the faint scent of Havana cigars. Rain lashed the mullioned windows. A grandfather clock ticked with ponderous authority. Poirot insisted on conducting the interviews himself, with Croft taking shorthand and Hastings as silent witness. Victor Langford was first. He slumped into a leather wing-chair, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. "Time you retired?" Poirot asked. "After Aunt Helena, say 10:45. Brandy in the billiard room, alone. Anyone see you? Graves brought a fresh decanter around 11. I was brooding. About." Victor's laugh was bitter. "Money, what else? Aunt controlled the purse strings. I'm in Queer Street, gambling debts, a filly that didn't place at Ascot. She threatened to cut me off if I didn't reform." "And the scream?" "I was in the smoking room. Ground floor, east side. Heard it clear as a bell. Ran upstairs. Door locked. You know the rest." Poirot noted the ash on Victor's cuffs. Fresh, not from the bedroom fire. Lady Beatrice Harrington swept in next. Sable coat discarded, now in a severe charcoal morning dress. "I retired at 10:50, she declared. Read The Constant Nymph until 11:30. Heard nothing until the scream. My room is south wing, too far." "You collect antiquities, madame?" "Among other things." Her eyes narrowed. "Elena had a Fabergé egg, lilies of the valley, rightfully mine. Won at cards in Monte Carlo, 1913. She claimed her late husband bought it fairly. Liar. Valuable? £20,000. Insured, naturally. But sentiment, Monsieur Poirot. Sentiment." Poirot's gaze flicked to her rings. Emeralds, sapphires, but no pearls. Dr. Elias Thorne entered quietly, medical bag in hand. "I checked on the Countess at 10:15. Her heart, you understand. Palpitations. Gave her the valerian myself. She was drowsy. I left via the service stairs. My room is above the old nursery. Anyone corroborate?" Clara passed me in the corridor, carrying fresh linen. Clara, summoned next, nodded tearfully. "Yes, sir. 10:20, perhaps." I took the Countess her nightgown, then went to my room, attic, west side. I heard the bolts, then nothing until the scream. Poirot leaned forward. "You were devoted to Madame." Clara's lips trembled. "She was difficult, demanding, but she paid well, and I have no family. Last month she accused me of stealing a brooch, emerald, small. It turned up in her jewel case. She apologized, but resentment lingers," Poirot finished gently. Colonel Blackwood marched in, boots gleaming. Retired 10:55, read the Times in bed, leader on Indian unrest. Heard the scream from the gunroom, cleaning my Webley. Graves saw me there at 11:45. Financial advisor to the Countess. Nominal, investments mostly. She was conservative, preferred jewels to stocks. He hesitated. Between us the estates stretched. Death duties after the Earl, crippling. Graves was last. His statement was a model of brevity. Checked the fires at 11 Trua. delivered brandy to Mr. Langford at 11:05, retired to my pantry, heard the scream, came immediately." Poirot asked softly, "You served in the war, Mr. Graves?" "Somerville Light Infantry, Ypres, Gast." The tremor in his hand again. By 9 o'clock, the search parties returned, soaked and empty-handed. The missing dinghy had washed ashore 2 miles down the coast, oarless, undamaged, no sign of the Countess. Poirot assembled everyone in the great hall. Rain drummed on the skylight. The chandelier swayed gently. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we face an impossibility. A woman vanishes from a room locked and bolted from within. Yet vanish she did. The method? That is the key. I propose 3 possibilities. 1. A secret exit we have not found. 2. The Countess left before the door was locked. Illusion. 3. She was removed after by someone with access to the key and bolts. We shall test each. Dr. Thorne, you will examine the valerian, dosage, potency. Miss Voss, you will inventory every key in the house. Colonel, the tunnels. Mr. Graves, the staff timetables. Captain Hastings and I, we begin with the room itself." Back in the bedroom, Poirot worked methodically. He measured the footprint in the soot. Size 5, narrow, a woman's court shoe. He examined the cracked pearl under a lens. The fracture was fresh, caused by pressure, not age. He opened the wardrobe again. Furs, gowns, a mink stole. Beneath it, a small leather case, locked. "Hastings, the picks." With delicate twists, Poirot sprang the lock. Inside, documents, a will dated last month, leaving the bulk of the estate to a San Francisco sanitarium for war veterans. Victor inherited only a trust fund, $5,000 per annum. Another paper, a letter from a London solicitor, Ray paternity claim, urgent. Hastings whistled. Someone's bastard child? Peut-être, or blackmail. Poirot turned to the fireplace. The soot smear led to a loose brick. He eased it out. Behind, a narrow cavity, and in it a child's doll, porcelain face cracked, dressed in Romanov court dress. One eye missing. Mon Dieu! The doll from the Revolution, the jewels smuggled inside. But the doll was empty, seams split long ago. At noon, Dr. Thorne reported, "Valerian enough to fell a horse. She'd have slept through an earthquake." Clara brought the key inventory. Only one key to the Yale lock, the Countess's own. Colonel Blackwood returned muddy. Tunnels flooded. One shaft collapses into the sea cave. Impassable. Poirot stood at the window, watching gulls wheel over the waves. "The tide hides secrets," he murmured, "but it also reveals them." He turned suddenly. "Hastings, the boathouse again. Look for rope." They found it at low tide. A coil of tarred hemp, newly cut, hidden beneath a pile of crab pots. One end frayed, the other knotted in a bowline, climber's knot. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Voila! Not a vanishing, a descent. But descent to where, and by whom? The grey cells stirred, restless as the gulls outside. The investigation had truly begun. Chapter 4. The Cave Beneath the Cliff. The tide went out with the reluctance of a guilty conscience, exposing a crescent of black shingle littered with bladder wrack and broken shells. At 2 o'clock the sun, pale, wintry but sun nonetheless, struck sparks from the wet rocks. Blue Harbour Manor loomed above, its gargoyles grinning down like conspirators. Poirot stood on the boathouse slipway, coat collar turned up against the wind, the coil of tarred rope over his shoulder like a sailor's burden. Hastings followed, lantern in one hand, a thermos of cocoa in the other. Mrs. Graves's contribution, thick as velvet. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, gesturing with a gloved hand. "The cliff is not sheer. See the zigzag of the old smuggler's path, cut into the rock, hidden at high water. A descent of mon Dieu 60 feet. With this rope, a strong man or two could lower a sleeping woman in a sling. Hastings peered over the edge. The path was a knife edge of shale, slick with spray. Risky in daylight, let alone a storm. Précisément, which is why the rope was cut and hidden. The dinghy, lure, a blind. The true exit was here. They descended. The rope, knotted at intervals, was anchored to an iron ring bolted into the cliff, centuries ago for contraband barrels. Poirot tested it, solid. Halfway down, a ledge jutted, wide enough for two. On it, a smear of mud, a single white camellia petal, and a scrape where something heavy had rested. Voila! The transfer point. The Countess, sedated, was lowered here, then carried along the path to, he pointed. At the base of the cliff, a jagged arch yawned in the rock, the mouth of the sea cave. The tide had retreated just far enough to reveal a strip of sand leading inside. The cave was a cathedral of stone, its roof lost in shadow. Water dripped in slow, metronomic beats. Their lantern threw golden pools across rippled sand. The air smelled of salt, rotting kelp, and something metallic, blood. Poirot knelt. In the centre of the cave, a circle had been cleared. Within it, a woman's kid slipper, the mate to the one in the bedroom. Beside it, a length of silk cord, torn, not cut, and a stain, dark and spreading. Hastings's voice echoed. Poirot, that's blood. Oui, but whose? Poirot scraped a sample into a glass vial. And observe, the sand is raked smooth around the circle. Someone wished to erase footprints, yet here, he pointed to a corner where the tide had not reached. A clear imprint, a man's boot, size 10 hobnailed. Beside it, a smaller print, Clara's court shoe, the same narrow heel from the hearth. They followed the prints. They led to a natural chimney in the rock, a vertical shaft rising into darkness. A rope ladder, new, manila fibre, dangled from iron spikes driven into the stone. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The second ascent, into the manor itself. The ladder emerged in the wine cellar behind a false rack of dusty Bordeaux. The rack swung inward on concealed hinges. Poirot pushed through, emerging among cobwebs and the scent of cork and tannin. The cellar was vast, its aisles like cathedral naves. At the far end, a door led to the servants' stairs. Parfait, the smuggler's tunnel restored, from bedroom to hearth to cave to cellar, all connected, but the locked door, Hastings, how? He retraced the route in his mind. The fireplace in the Countess's room, the loose brick, the doll, the soot. The chimney was too narrow, but the hearth itself. Back in the bedroom, Poirot knelt again. The fire screen was ornate, brass, with a panel that slid aside. Behind it, a narrow grating, removable. He eased it out. A shaft brick-lined, just wide enough for a slender person to wriggle through. It dropped vertically to the cellar. Le voilà, the true secret passage. The fireplace was the door. The soot on the hearthrug. Someone emerged here after the Countess was drugged. The scream. A recording. A confederate. We shall see. At 4 o'clock, Poirot summoned the household to the winter garden. The glass dome dripped with condensation. Orchids drooped like mourners. The suspects sat in a semicircle, the sea a restless grey beyond the panes. Poirot stood beneath the serious bower, the bloodied slipper in one hand, the rope in the other. Mesdames et messieurs, the impossible is explained. The Countess was drugged with valerian, merci, Dr. Thorne. She was then bound with silk cord, torn in struggle, perhaps, lowered via the cliff path to the cave. From there, carried or dragged up the rope ladder to the wine cellar. But the locked room. The murderer entered through the fireplace shaft, narrow, but possible for a small person. Miss Voss, your shoe size. Clara paled. 4.5. Précisément. You crawled through, administered the drug, staged the scream, perhaps a phonograph cylinder hidden in the wardrobe. Then you opened the door for your accomplice, who carried the Countess out the conventional way, down the servants' stairs while we slept. The bolts were drawn back, the key replaced. The door relocked from outside with a duplicate. Voila! Victor leapt up. Absurd! Clara's a mouse. She couldn't what, mon neveu? Carry a drugged woman? No, but you could. The boot print in the cave, size 10 hobnailed. Your riding boots, I think. Victor's face strained. I was in the billiard room. Non. Graves saw you at 11:05, but the cellar door was oiled, silent. You met Miss Voss in the cave at low tide, 1:15 a.m. The storm masked the noise. You carried your aunt to the dinghy, planning to stage a drowning. But she woke, struggled, tore the cord. You struck her, here. He touched the bloodied slipper. And she fell. The tide took her. Clara sobbed. It wasn't meant to be murder. Just scare her. Make her change the will. Victor said, Silence! Victor roared, lunging for the rope. You little... Colonel Blackwood seized him. Steady, lad. Poirot continued, relentless. The camellias, your signature, Miss Voss, from the hothouse. The cracked pearl, dropped in haste. The doll in the wall, distraction. But the blood, mes amis, does not lie. Inspector Croft arrived with constables. Victor was handcuffed, still protesting. Clara collapsed weeping. The others stood frozen, the orchids trembling in the draught. Poirot turned to the window. The tide was coming in, slow and inexorable, covering the cave mouth. La mère, she keeps her secrets, he murmured, but not from Hercule Poirot. That evening, the manor was quiet. The police had gone, taking Victor and Clara. Dr. Thorne prescribed sedatives for Lady Beatrice, who had taken to her bed with nerves. Colonel Blackwood poured brandy with a shaking hand. Poirot and Hastings stood on the terrace, watching the sun bleed into the sea. Case closed? Hastings asked. No, the body is not found. Without it, no murder charge. Only abduction, perhaps. And the will, the will. The sanitarium inherits, unless... He withdrew the paternity letter from his pocket. A child, Hastings. The Countess's secret. Born in St. Francisco, 1919, the heir. Hastings stared. Then Victor's motive was to prevent the truth. The child arrives tomorrow, by liner from America. The Countess planned to reveal all at the house party. Poirot folded the letter. But the sea, she may yet give up her dead. In the cave, as the tide rose, something glinted among the kelp. A pearl necklace, broken, the clasp snapped. And caught in the rocks, a shred of midnight blue velvet. The Countess had not vanished after all. She had been taken by the sea. But whose hand had pushed her? Chapter 5. The Air from the Fog. Poirot stood at the breakfast-room window, watching mist curl off the water like cigarette smoke. He had not slept. The little grey cells required fuel, not rest. A single coddled egg, one triangle of toast cut with mathematical precision, and a pot of chocolate so dark it reflected his moustache like a mirror. Hastings, opposite him, demolished kippers with the enthusiasm of a man who believes calories can solve riddles. Poirot, he said between mouthfuls, the body hasn't washed up. Without it, Croft can only hold Victor and Clara for abduction. The will stands. That American sanitarium gets everything. Précisément. And yet, Poirot tapped the paternity letter against the tablecloth. The child arrives today. A son born 1919. The Countess wrote to the solicitors in August, "Prepare for my heir's arrival. All will be revealed at Blue Harbour." Victor knew. Clara knew. Someone ensured the revelation never happened. The doorbell clanged. 3 solemn notes. Graves glided to answer it. Moments later, he returned with a card on a silver salver. Nicholas was 28, tall, sun-browned, with the easy stride of a man who has crossed oceans and continents without losing his hat. His suit was American cut, broad shoulders, narrow waist, and his eyes were the exact winter-sea grey of the Countess's. He carried a leather valise and a rolled document sealed with crimson wax. Monsieur Poirot. His French was fluent, lightly accented. My mother's letter reached me in New York. I sailed the moment I read it. Then the wireless. Countess missing. Presumed drowned. I came anyway. Poirot studied him. The nose was aristocratic, the mouth sensitive. A faint scar crossed the left eyebrow. Dueling. Bar fight. The little grey cells filed it away. Votre mère was drugged, removed from a locked room, lowered by rope to a cave, and vanished into the sea. Poirot summarized. Her nephew Victor and Secretary Clara are in custody. Yet the body is not found. The will favours a sanitarium, unless you prove paternity. Nicholas opened the valise. Inside, a birth certificate, a locket with a miniature of the Countess aged 20, and a letter in her handwriting. To my son, if I am gone, trust Poirot. The truth is in the doll. Hastings choked on his kipper. The doll in the wall? They adjourned to the library. Nicholas laid the documents on the baize table. The birth certificate was San Francisco, 12th of March, 1919. Father, unknown. Mother, Elena Voshkova, spinster. A notary's seal, crisp and official. The doll, Nicholas said, was my nursemaid's tale. Mother smuggled the Romanov jewels inside it when she fled Petrograd. She told me the real treasure was me, but the jewels paid for my education. She sent me to boarding school in England, then to Stanford. I hadn't seen her since 1925. Poirot turned the locket in his fingers. Inside, the miniature countess smiled, younger, softer. On the back engraved, "To N, my vanishing boy." Vanishing, Poirot repeated. A clue, perhaps. At 10:30, Inspector Croft arrived with 2 constables and a warrant to search the cellars again. The inquest was postponed. New evidence. Poirot insisted on accompanying them. The wine cellar was colder now, the false rack still ajar. Torchlight swept across dusty bottles. Croft's men tapped walls, shifted crates, nothing. Poirot's gaze fell on the rope ladder, still dangling into the cave shaft. Attendees, the tide is low again. We go down. They descended single file. Poirot, Hastings, Nicholas, Croft, a constable with a bullseye lantern. The cave smelled of iodine and decay. The circle of raked sand was undisturbed, the bloodied slipper bagged as evidence. But something new glinted at the water's edge. A gold clasp, engraved EV, attached to a shred of midnight blue velvet. Nicholas knelt. Her dressing gown. She was wearing it when I last saw her. Photograph, Christmas 1924. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Torn, not cut. She fought. But where is the rest? The constable's lantern swept the cave mouth. The tide had retreated farther than yesterday, revealing a narrow fissure in the rock, a crevice no wider than a man's shoulders, half submerged at high water. The lantern beam caught something inside. A flash of white. "La!" Poirot cried. They squeezed through. The fissure opened into a smaller cavern, a natural cistern. The tide pooled knee-deep, black and still. And there, wedged between 2 boulders, was the Countess. She lay on her back, arms outstretched as if embracing the sea. The midnight blue velvet clung to her like a shroud. The pearl necklace was gone, only the broken clasp remaining. Her eyes were open, filmed with salt, staring at the roof. A bruise darkened her temple. Dark, ugly, fatal. Hastings crossed himself. Nicholas made a sound like a wounded animal. Poirot knelt in the water, heedless of his trousers. He touched her cheek, cold, rigid, rigor mortis fully established, death at least 36 hours ago. He examined the bruise, a single blow, delivered with a blunt object. No water in the lungs, Dr. Thorne would confirm, but she had been dead before the sea claimed her. Mon Dieu! Not drowning, murder! The cave was the tomb, the tide the undertaker. They carried her out on a stretcher improvised from oars and a tarpaulin. The manor staff lined the cliff path, faces pale, caps in hand. Lady Beatrice watched from an upper window, lorgnette steady for once. Colonel Blackwood stood ramrod straight, eyes suspiciously bright. In the great hall, Dr. Thorne performed a cursory examination. Blow to the right temple, depressed fracture, instantaneous, no seawater in the lungs, dead before the tide rose. Croft scratched his head. Then Victor's story collapses. He said she fell in the struggle, hit her head on the dinghy, but the dinghy was empty when it washed ashore. Poirot paced. Exactement. The dinghy was the second blind. The true crime, the Countess was carried unconscious to the inner cavern. The murderer struck her there, arranged the body, and fled as the tide rose. The outer cave was staged, bloodied slipper, torn cord, to suggest a seaside struggle. Nicholas's voice was raw. Who knew about the inner cavern? Poirot stopped. Smuggler's law. The estate maps show only the main cave, but someone who played here as a child. All eyes turned to Victor, still in the village lockup. At 2:00, Poirot interviewed Victor again, this time in the manor's gunroom, under Croft's supervision. Victor was unshaven, eyes red-rimmed, but defiance still burned. You lied, mon neveu. The dinghy was untouched. Your aunt was killed in the inner cave. You knew it, because you put her there. Victor laughed, a cracked sound. Prove it. Clara drugged her. I carried her down the cliff. That's all. She woke, screamed, slipped. Accident. No. The scream was at midnight, before you reached the cave. The bruise is from a rock, not a dinghy thwart. And the clasp? Poirot dangled it. Found inside the fissure. You tore it from her throat as she fought. Victor lunged, but the constable restrained him. I want my solicitor. Clara Voss was next, brought from the village in a Black Maria. She had not stopped crying since her arrest. In the library, Poirot offered her a chair and a cup of tea laced with brandy. Mademoiselle, the game is up. Victor blames you. You blame him. But the truth, he placed the doll on the table, is in here. Clara stared. She told me the doll was empty, the jewels gone. Oui, but the real treasure was the locket inside, the proof of Nicholas's birth. You found it, did you not? When you crawled through the fireplace to drug her tea. Clara's sobs hitched. I only wanted my wages. She owed me 6 months. Victor said if we scared her, made her think the ghost walked, she'd pay. Then Nicholas's letter came. Victor went mad, said the American would take everything. He made me help carry her to the cave. She woke as we reached the fissure. She begged, Victor, he picked up a rock. She buried her face in her hands. At dusk, the pieces locked into place. The fireplace shaft, Clara's entrance. The cliff descent, Victor's strength. The inner cavern, Victor's childhood hideout, where he and his cousin had played pirates. The rock, still in the cave, blood and hair adhering. The clasp, torn in the final struggle. Poirot stood on the terrace with Nicholas, watching the sun bleed into the sea. The will is invalid. Nicholas said quietly. Mother left everything to the sanitarium because she believed I wanted no part of this world. I only wanted her. Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. Monsieur, you have her eyes, and now her legacy. The jewels are gone, but the manor is yours. Use it well. Nicholas nodded, tears glinting. And Victor? Hanged. Clara. Transportation, perhaps. The law is slow, but sure. That night, the manor was silent. The police had gone. The body lay in the ice house, awaiting the coroner. Poirot and Hastings prepared to leave on the morning train. In the library, Poirot opened the doll one last time. Inside the hollow body, tucked beneath the cracked porcelain head, was a final surprise. A tiny envelope. Inside, a single white camellia petal and a note in the Countess's hand. Chapter 6. The Trial of the Tides. The courtroom smelled of beeswax, wet wool, and fear. Oak benches groaned under the weight of spectators. Reporters scratched furiously in the press gallery. A gas chandelier hissed overhead, throwing a sickly light onto the scarlet robes of Mr. Justice Carstairs, whose wig sat like a powdered sheep on his narrow skull. In the dock stood Victor Langford, once golden, now grey. His cuffs were frayed. His eyes, ringed with sleepless violet, darted like a cornered fox. Beside him, in a separate enclosure, Clara Voss, small, bird-boned, dressed in prison drab, kept her gaze fixed on the floorboards as if they might open and swallow her. Hercule Poirot sat in the witness box, immaculate in charcoal worsted, the cracked pearl earring in a small envelope on the rail before him. Hastings in the public seats clutched his hat so tightly the brim curled. The prosecution, Sir Reginald Hawtrey, K.C., rose like a galleon under full sail. My lord, the Crown will prove that on the night of 8 October 1927, Victor Langford and Clara Voss conspired to abduct and did murder Elena Vorskova, Countess of Blue Harbour. The method, a locked room illusion, a cliff descent, a blow in a sea cave. The motive, greed, pure and simple. Victor's counsel, Mr. Evelyn Forsyth, young, brilliant and sweating, objected at every turn. My lord, the Crown relies on circumstantial threads. No direct witness to the blow. The defendant Langford admits abduction under duress, but murder, never. Poirot took the oath with the solemnity of a cardinal. Hawtrey led him through the timeline with surgical precision. Describe the bedroom, Monsieur Poirot. Parfaitement scellé, door locked, bolted from within, key on the inside, windows bolted, chimney too narrow. Yet the bed was warm, the vieux fire tended, the Countess gone. And your conclusion? A secret passage via the fireplace shaft, narrow, but negotiable by a small person. Miss Voss's shoe print in the soot. She entered, drugged the tisane, staged the scream with a phonograph cylinder hidden in the wardrobe. Then she opened the door for Langford, who carried the unconscious Countess down the servants' stairs while the household slept. Forsyth cross-examined. You assume a phonograph. Where is it? Poirot smiled thinly. Recovered from the wine cellar, wrapped in oilskin, wax cylinder, a woman's scream, recorded in the Manor's music room the previous week. Miss Voss's voice, distorted by speed. Gasps rippled. Clara sobbed audibly. Dr. Elias Thorne testified to the valerian dosage, enough to fell a horse, and the head wound, a single downward blow with a rock, 2.7 pounds, found in the inner cavern with blood and hair adhering, death instantaneous. Nicholas Vorskov Langford took the stand, voice steady. My mother wrote to me in August, come before October, Victor must not inherit. I arrived too late. Forsyth pressed. You claim paternity. Where is the proof? Nicholas produced the locket, the birth certificate, the doll's hidden letter. My mother smuggled me out of Russia in that doll. The jewels paid for my life. She feared Victor would destroy the evidence. Colonel Blackwood, ramrod in the box, admitted the estate's debts, death duties, bad investments. The Countess planned to sell the Fabergé egg to clear them. Victor knew he'd forged papers to sell it himself. Lady Beatrice Harrington, acid in black lace, confirmed the egg's value. 20,000. Victor offered it to me under the table. I refused. Graves, the butler, spoke softly. Master Victor was in the wine cellar at 11:47 p.m. I saw the light under the door. He claimed he was fetching brandy. Clara Voss broke. Under Hawtrey's gentle prodding, she recounted the plan. Scare the Countess into changing the will. Stage a haunting with camellias and footsteps. But Victor's rage at Nicholas's letter turned it lethal. He said, if she talks, we're finished. He made me crawl through the fireplace. I only wanted my wages. Forsyth tried to salvage, duress, my lord, a terrified girl. But the jury had heard enough. After 3 hours, the foreman stood. Guilty of murder, both defendants. Victor lunged at the dock rail. I didn't mean... The warders dragged him down. Clara fainted. Sentence, death for Victor, transportation for life for Clara. The manor was shuttered, the orchids dying in the winter garden. Nicholas had dismissed the staff save Graves, who remained out of loyalty or guilt. Poirot and Hastings lingered for the reading of the true will. Nicholas unfolded the document. Everything to me, manor, jewels, egg. The sanitarium gets her endowment. Victor's trust fund revoked. Poirot nodded. Justice, but one thread remains. He led them to the library. On the table, the phonograph cylinder, the bloodied rock, the cracked pearl, and a new item, a white camellia, fresh in a crystal vase. From the hothouse, Nicholas said. I found it on the doorstep this morning. No note. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Impossible. The hothouse was locked after the police search. They followed the scent, tuberose and salt, up the west wing to the Countess's bedroom. The door stood ajar. Inside the bed was made, the fire laid but unlit. On the pillow, another camellia and a single pearl earring, the mate to the cracked one. Hastings gasped. Poirot! She's alive? No. The body was identified by dental records, the bruise, the gown, but someone wishes us to believe otherwise. Torch in hand, Poirot descended the rope ladder one last time. The cave was dry, the tide far out. In the inner cavern, the boulders had been moved. A hollow yawned where the Countess had lain. On the rock shelf, a woman's kid slipper, the left one, and a scrap of paper. Poirot's breath caught. The doll, back in the manor, locked in Nicholas's safe. Nicholas pried open the doll's cracked porcelain head. Inside the hollow skull, behind the remaining painted eye, a tiny compartment, within a microfilm negative. Poirot held it to the lamp. A list, names, dates, sums. Romanov jewels, smuggled to Zurich, 1918. The Countess had not fled penniless. She had hidden a fortune in Swiss vaults. The sanitarium was a blind. The real heir was a trust for white Russian émigrés. Nicholas stared. She never trusted anyone, not even me. At dawn, Poirot confronted Graves in the gun-room. The butler stood polishing a Webley, hands steady now. You left the camellias, Poirot said. You moved the body from the inner cavern to the outer, after the police search. You planted the slipper, the note. Why? Graves's voice was flat. She saved my life at Ypres. Nursed me when the gas took my lungs. I owed her. Victor's plan was filth. I followed them to the cave. He struck her. I waited until they fled, then carried her to the cistern to hide her from the tide. After the trial, I moved her again so the sea could take her home. He opened a drawer. Inside, the pearl necklace, restrung, and the Fabergé egg, gleaming. I posted the camellias to keep her memory alive. The doll's eye. I knew about the film. She told me everything. Poirot sighed. Mon ami, you should have trusted the law. Graves smiled faintly. The law hanged her son. Some debts are paid in silence. He raised the Webley, not at Poirot, but to his own temple. No! Poirot lunged, but the shot cracked like thunder. Graves fell, blood pooling on the Persian rug. In his pocket, a final camellia pressed flat. Poirot sat in Whitehaven Mansions, the microfilm dispatched to Zurich, the fortune safe for the émigrés. Nicholas had sold the manor to a museum, the egg to the V&A. Blue Harbour would become a sanctuary for artists. Hastings poured tea. Case closed. Poirot twirled his moustache. Presque. The Countess vanished thrice. From her room, from the cave, from the world. But her secrets, they endure. He opened a small box. Inside, 2 camellia petals pressed between glass. In profundis salus, he murmured, in the depths, salvation. Outside, the Thames fog swallowed the city, and somewhere a buoy clanged its mournful warning. Chapter 7. The Last Camellia. The letter arrived with the Morning Post, sealed in heavy cream stock, the crest a wave breaking against a cliff. Poirot slit it with his silver opener, the blade catching the gaslight like a stiletto. The manor is sold, the egg is gone, the fortune is safe in Zurich, yet one thread remains. Meet me at Blue Harbour, midnight, the Winter Garden, come alone, the vanishing is not complete. Hastings looked up from the Times. Nicholas, after all this! Poirot folded the letter with geometrical care. Oui. The heir summons the detective. We return to the cliffs. The manor was a husk. Windows boarded, the drive choked with brambles. The for sale sign had blown down. The iron gate hung ajar like a broken jaw. Poirot's torch cut a narrow path through the darkness. The wind off the harbour carried salt and the faint perfume of tuberose, impossible in February. The Winter Garden dome was cracked, moonlight spilling through like spilled milk. The orchids were skeletons, their petals long fallen. In the centre, beneath the withered Sirius, stood Nicholas Vorskov Langford, coat collar up, a white camellia in his buttonhole. You came, he said. His voice was hoarse, as if he had been shouting into the wind. Poirot switched off the torch. Natural element. You speak of an unfinished vanishing. Nicholas gestured to a marble bench. On it, the doll, its porcelain head repaired, one eye still missing. Beside it, a small leather jewel case. I found this in the safe after you left. Mother's handwriting on the lid, for the one who sees. Poirot opened the case. Inside, a single camellia petal, pressed flat, and a photograph. Sepia, faded. The Countess Young standing on the cliff path with a child in her arms. The child's face had been scratched out with a pin. Mon Dieu! The vanishing boy, again. Nicholas's laugh was bitter. Not me. I was in San Francisco. This child was born here, 1920, after Mother married the Earl. The Earl died hunting, accident, they said. But the child vanished the same night. Mother searched for years. She believed Victor's father, her brother-in-law, took the boy to punish her for the marriage. Poirot turned the photograph. On the back, in the Countess's hand. If I fail, find him. The camellia will lead you. The hothouse was locked, but the padlock was new. Nicholas's doing. Inside, the air was warm, humid, heavy with the scent of camellias. Rows of plants, meticulously tended, glowed white in the moonlight. Graves kept them alive, Nicholas said. He left instructions with the estate agent. Water the camellias. They are her eyes. Poirot knelt by the nearest plant. The soil was disturbed. He dug with his penknife. Beneath, a small tin box rusted, sealed with wax. Inside, a lock of dark hair, a tiny silver rattle, and a birth certificate. Alexander Vorskov Langford, born 12 of October 1920, Blue Harbour Manor. Mother, Eleanor. Father, unknown. Hastings, who had followed despite orders, whistled. Another heir. Oui, the true one. Nicholas, you are the decoy. The Countess sent you to America to protect you, then summoned you back to flush out the killer. Nicholas's face crumpled. She used me. She saved you. They descended the rope ladder one last time. The cave was dry, the tide far out. The inner cavern had been cleared, the boulders stacked neatly, the cistern empty. But on the rock shelf where the Countess had lain, a single camellia bloomed, impossible in winter. Poirot lifted it. Beneath, a brass key, old, ornate. The family vault, Nicholas breathed, under the chapel, sealed since the Earl's death. The chapel was a ruin, pews rotted, the altar cloth moth-eaten. A trapdoor in the floor, concealed beneath a prayer rug, yielded to the key. Stone steps spiraled down into darkness. The vault was small, damp, lined with lead-lined coffins. One stood open, the Earl's, empty. On the lid, scratched with a knife, "The boy lives." Poirot's torch swept the walls. In the corner, a bundle of rags. He pulled them aside. A skeleton, small, child-sized, wrapped in a christening gown yellowed with age. The skull had been crushed. Hastings turned away. Nicholas retched. Poirot knelt. Around the tiny neck, a silver chain, a medallion engraved AVL, Alexander Vorskov Langford. "The Earl," Poirot said quietly. "He took the child, killed him in rage, hid the body here." The Countess discovered the truth, too late. She sealed the vault, planted the camellias as a memorial. Victor's father helped cover it up, hence the forged papers, the debts, the desperation to keep the secret buried. Nicholas's voice was a whisper. And Graves? Graves knew. He tended the camellias for both, a mother and son. His suicide was penance. They returned to the dome. Nicholas placed the tiny skeleton's medallion in the doll's hollow skull, beside the microfilm. "I'll bury him with her," he said, "in the chapel, the vault sealed forever." Poirot nodded. "C'est juste. The vanishing is complete." But as they turned to leave, a sound, soft, deliberate. Footsteps on the gravel outside. A shadow passed the cracked glass. Nicholas drew a revolver. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice, old, cracked, but unmistakable. "Elena." The serious bower rustled. A figure stepped into the moonlight, tall, cloaked, face veiled in black lace. The veil lifted, the Countess. She was gaunt, hair white as salt, eyes sunken but alive. A scar ran from temple to jaw, the bruise's legacy. In her hand, a white camellia. "Maman!" Nicholas's voice broke. She smiled, a terrible smile. "I never left the cave. Graves found me, barely breathing. The blow glanced, not fatal. He hid me in the cistern, tended me in secret. The body you found," she gestured to the doll, "was a tailor's dummy, dressed in my gown, weighted with stones, the teeth, my own, pulled years ago for gold. The police were hasty." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mon Dieu, the ultimate vanishing. You staged your death to expose the killer and protect your sons." She nodded. "Victor would have killed Nicholas next. I needed him to confess. Graves helped, moved the dummy, planted the clues. His death," her voice cracked, "was to protect me. The camellias were our signal." Nicholas embraced her, sobbing. "Why not tell me?" "I couldn't risk it. Not until Victor hanged. The police would come again, questions, explanations, perhaps charges. But for now, mother and son sat in the winter garden, the doll between them, the camellias blooming in defiance of winter. Poirot stood at the door. "Madame, you have outwitted even Hercule Poirot." She inclined her head. "The little grey cells are brilliant, monsieur, but a mother's heart is deeper than the sea." Poirot received a parcel. Inside, a single white camellia, pressed between glass, and a note. "The manor is yours, monsieur. A sanctuary for detectives and poets. The camellias will bloom forever." Hastings stared. "She gave you the house?" Poirot smiled. "Non, she gave me the mystery. And the mystery, mon ami, is the only home I need." Outside, the Thames fog lifted, and for the first time in weeks, the sun struck the water like a promise. Chapter 8. The Sanctuary of Camellias. The deed arrived by registered post, sealed in crimson wax with the wave and cliff crest. Poirot held it to the gaslight in Whitehaven Mansions, his reflection superimposed on the vellum like a ghost. To Hercule Poirot, for services rendered to truth and to mothers. The manor, the hothouse, the camellias, yours. Use them well. Hastings dropped his teacup. "Poirot, old chap, you're a landowner." Poirot twirled his moustache. "Non, I am a custodian. The Countess has given me a puzzle to keep, not a house to live in." The camellias had multiplied. Graves's instructions, found in his locker, were meticulous. Temperature, humidity, pruning schedules. A new gardener, Mrs. Penhaligon, widow of a trawler captain, tended them with the reverence of a priestess. She curtsied to Poirot. "Her ladyship left funds, sir. Enough for a lifetime. The white ones bloom year-round now." Poirot inhaled the heavy sweetness. Magnifique. A living memorial. In the centre bed, a single plant bore flowers of deepest crimson, new, grafted from a cutting smuggled from Kyoto. Mrs. Penhaligon whispered, "The Countess sent it before she vanished. Said it was for the child who never saw spring." Nicholas had transformed the dome. The cracked glass was replaced. Skylights opened to let in light. Easels stood where orchids once drooped. Young artists, shell-shocked poets, painters with trembling hands, worked in silence, their canvases alive with cliffs and waves. Nicholas greeted them, thinner, eyes older. "Mother's idea. A place for those the war broke. The camellias pay the bills." The Countess herself was absent. Rumour placed her in a Swiss clinic, recovering from the blow that had nearly ended her. Poirot suspected she watched from afar, a ghost in her own legend. The books had been catalogued. The forbidden tomes, occult, alchemical, were locked in a cedar cabinet. On the baize table, the doll, now restored, both eyes intact, the microfilm removed. In its place, a tiny silver rattle. Poirot lifted it. It chimed, a sound like distant bells. Hastings shivered. "The child's?" "Oui, Alexander." The rattle was in the tin box with the hair. The Countess kept it close, even in her vanishing. A knock. Mrs. Penhaligon entered, apron dusted with pollen. "Begging your pardon, sir. A parcel, delivered by hand, no return address." The parcel was small, wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a child's shoe, white kid size 2. The sole was worn through at the toe. A note in the Countess's hand, found in the chapel vault. He walked before he vanished. Keep it safe. Poirot turned the shoe in his fingers. A faint stain, mud from the cliff path perhaps, or blood. Poirot laid the shoe on the altar. Requiescat. Hastings lit a candle. The flame danced, throwing shadows across the crypt. For a moment, the air thickened, the temperature dropped. A whisper, soft, childlike. Poirot froze. "Hastings, écoutez!" The whisper again closer. "Maman!" They searched. Pews, confessionals, the belfry. Nothing. Only the wind through the cracked rose window. Tourists would come, Poirot knew. The sanctuary would fund itself on legend. But in the inner cavern, the cistern was dry. On the rock shelf, a new camellia bloomed, crimson, perfect. Beside it, a child's handprint in the dust, fresh. Poirot knelt. The print was small, perfect. He placed his own hand beside it, his fingers dwarfed it. Impossible, Hastings breathed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. No, the Countess returns, in her own way. The room was untouched, a shrine. The bed was made, the fire laid. On the pillow, a single white camellia, dew fresh. The scent of tuberose hung heavy. Poirot opened the wardrobe. The midnight blue velvet gown hung pristine, the tear mended with stitches so fine they were invisible. The pearl necklace lay on the dressing table, restrung, the cracked pearl replaced. Hastings touched the gown. She's been here. She never left. The clinic is a blind. She lives in the walls, the cliffs, the camellias. A floorboard creaked. They spun. The room was empty. Nicholas joined them, a sketchbook under his arm. The artists hear her. Footsteps at night, a child's laugh. They paint her, veiled, scarred, holding a boy with no face. Poirot gazed at the harbour. The tide was out, the cave mouth yawning. La Comtesse is the manor now. Her vanishing was never escape. It was apotheosis. Nicholas opened the sketchbook. A charcoal drawing. The Countess on the cliff path. The child in her arms both dissolving into camellia petals. She wrote to me, he said, from nowhere. The sanctuary is yours. I am the camellias. Tend them, and I tend you. Chapter 9. The Garden That Remembers. The words were etched in flowing script, the crest beneath them a single white camellia, unfurling into a wave. Tourists came by charabanc from Torquay. Artists arrived with easels and broken hearts. Poets sent manuscripts addressed to the detective of petals. The manor had become legend, its locked room a pilgrimage, its hothouse a shrine. Poirot stood on the terrace at dawn, coat buttoned to the throat, a watering can in one hand. The camellias had spread, white along the cliff path, crimson in the chapel vault, pink in the winter garden where the cereus now bloomed nightly. Mrs. Penhaligon followed with pruning shears, humming a Cornish lullaby. "Morning, sir," she said. "The new bed by the boathouse is ready. Shall I plant the seed from the doll?" Poirot nodded. "Oui. Let the child walk the cliffs again." The air was thick with nectar and memory. Nicholas Vorskov-Langford, now resident curator, arranged cuttings in terracotta pots. His hair had silvered at the temples. The scar on his mother's temple lived in his eyes. "Letters from Switzerland," he said, handing Poirot a stack. "Mother writes every month. No return address. Always a pressed camellia." Poirot opened the top envelope. The petal inside was white, veined with crimson, like the hybrid in the vault. "The garden remembers what we forget." Tend Alexander's bed. He laughs in the wind. Nicholas smiled faintly. The artists hear him. A boy in a sailor suit, running between the beds. They paint him, faceless, always faceless. Poirot tucked the petal into his breast pocket, beside the cracked pearl he still carried. La Comtesse is the garden now. She tends her sons. Beneath it, the crimson camellia had grown into a shrub, its roots cracking the mortar. A single white bloom had forced its way through the stone, impossible, tender, defiant. Poirot knelt, gloved fingers brushing the petals. The earth was warm, as if a heart beat beneath. A shadow fell across the plaque. Mrs. Penhaligon gasped. "Sir, look!" A child's footprint, bare, perfect, pressed into the soil beside the camellia. Dew beaded in the tiny toes. Poirot measured it with a pocket rule. "Size 2, the shoe we found." Nicholas arrived, sketchbook in hand. "The poets saw him last night, running toward the cave, laughing." The spiral staircase gleamed. The museum cases glowed under electric light. installed by Nicholas with sanctuary funds. The bloodied rock, the torn cord, the phonograph cylinder. A new exhibit, the child's shoe, displayed beside the rattle. Tourists murmured. A woman in a cloche hat wept openly. My brother vanished in the war. This place, it gives them back. Poirot descended to the inner cavern. The cistern was now a pool, fed by a spring. Water lilies, white impossibly, floated on the surface. In the centre, a crimson camellia bloomed, rooted in the rock itself. He knelt. Beneath the water something glinted. He reached in, fingers closing on cold metal. A silver medallion, engraved AVL, the mate to the one in the vault. The water rippled. For a moment a child's face, pale smiling, looked up at him, then gone. The room was a museum too. The bed was made, the fire laid but cold. On the pillow, a single white camellia, dew fresh. The scent of tuberose hung heavy. Poirot opened the wardrobe. The midnight blue velvet gown was gone. In its place, a child's sailor suit, freshly pressed, the brass buttons polished to suns. Hastings, arriving with coffee, stared. Poirot, she's dressing him. Oui, the garden remembers, the manor restores. The artists worked in silence. One, a young woman with shell-shock eyes, painted the Countess on the cliff path, the child in her arms dissolving into petals. Another sketched the cave pool, the crimson camellia glowing like a heart. Poirot addressed the group. Mes amis, the mystery is not solved, it is lived. The Countess vanished to save her sons. The child vanished to save his mother, the camellias. Elle se souviennent. In the hothouse, a boy runs barefoot through petals. His laughter the only locked room we cannot open. The Countess tends him with salt on her fingers. Mrs. Penhaligon had prepared the new bed, rich loam, peat, a silver trowel. Poirot planted the seed from the doll's skull. Nicholas sprinkled water from the cave pool. The earth steamed, as if breathing. A tourist boat sounded its horn in the harbour. Children waved from the deck. One, a boy in a sailor suit, pointed to the cliff path. For a moment, another boy waved back, pale, barefoot, laughing. The tourists saw nothing. The artists saw everything. The cedar cabinet was open. The forbidden tomes were gone, donated to the British Museum. In their place, children's books, fairy tales, a copy of Peter Pan with a pressed camellia as bookmark. Poirot lifted the doll. Its porcelain head was warm. The eyes, both intact, followed him. He opened the skull. Inside, the rattle, the locket, the microfilm. And now, a tiny camellia sprout, rooted in cotton wool. Nicholas entered, eyes wide. It's growing, inside her. Poirot closed the doll gently. La Comtesse is the seed. The child is the bloom. The sun bled into the sea, painting the camellias gold. The artists gathered, sketches in hand. Mrs. Penhaligon served tea from a samovar. The countesses restored. Poirot raised his cup. To the garden that remembers, to the vanishings that endure. Nicholas added, to Mother, wherever she is. A wind rose, carrying the scent of tuberose and salt. The camellias shivered, petals drifting like snow. Chapter 10. The eternal bloom carabancs arrived daily from Exeter, disgorging pilgrims in tweed and wonder. The brass plaque at the gate now bore a second line beneath Poirot's name. In memory of Eleanor and Alexander Vorskov Langford. The cliff path was paved with white stone. Every third slab was engraved with a camellia petal. Children left marbles in the cracks. Lovers left locks of hair. Poirot stood at the hothouse door at dawn, watering can in hand, coat unbuttoned for the first time in memory. The camellias had conquered, white along the cliffs, crimson in the chapel, pink in the winter garden, and now a new hybrid, Camellia Poirot, petals white-edged in crimson, bred by Mrs. Penhaligon and named in secret ceremony. Nicholas met him with coffee. "The post, sir, from Switzerland." The envelope was thick, sealed with crimson wax. Inside, a single white camellia, pressed flat, and a photograph. The Countess, scar silver in the sun, stood in a mountain garden. In her arms, Alexander, now 4, barefoot, laughing, a crimson camellia tucked behind his ear. On the back, in her hand, "We bloom where we are planted. The sanctuary is yours. We are the garden." Poirot tucked the photograph into his breast pocket, beside the cracked pearl and the child's silver rattle. The air was a cathedral of scent. Mrs. Penhaligon pruned with reverence, her apron pocket bulging with camellia seeds. "The Poirot hybrid's taken, sir. Every cutting roots in a week. It's unnatural." In the centre bed, the doll stood on a marble plinth. Its porcelain head was warm to the touch. The sprout inside had become a miniature camellia, crimson, perfect, blooming year-round. Visitors left offerings, a child's mitten, a soldier's medal, a love letter sealed with wax. A tourist, a woman in mourning black, knelt before the doll. "My daughter vanished in 18. They said the sea took her. Here, I feel her." Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder. "Madame, the garden gives back what the world takes." The vault was a bower. The crimson camellia tree had grown through the mortar, its trunk thick as a man's thigh, roots cradling the plaque. White blooms forced through the stone, their petals veined with crimson, like the Countess's scar. Alexander's footprint, bare, perfect, remained in the soil, filled with dew that never evaporated. Mrs. Penhaligon swept around it daily, leaving a circle of bare earth. Nicholas arrived with a sketchbook. The poets wrote a new verse. He read aloud. "The boy runs barefoot through the vault, his laughter cracks the stone." The Countess tends him with salt on her lips. Poirot knelt, fingers brushing the footprint. The dew was warm. "Il vit, he lives." The spiral staircase gleamed. The museum cases glowed under electric light. The bloodied rock, the torn cord, the phonograph cylinder, the child's shoe. A new exhibit, the silver medallion from the cistern pool, displayed beside its mate. The inner cavern was now a chapel of water. The pool reflected the camellia tree above, its crimson blooms floating like blood drops. Visitors tossed coins, children tossed petals. Poirot descended alone. The water was warm, waist-deep. He waded to the centre. The crimson camellia rooted in the rock had grown into a bush, its blooms glowing like lanterns. He reached beneath the surface. His fingers closed on something smooth, porcelain. He lifted it, the doll's missing eye, painted blue, staring up at him. A ripple. The child's face, Alexander, smiled from the water, then vanished. Poirot climbed out, the eye in his palm. "Tu me vois, you see me." The room was a shrine. The bed was made, the fire laid but cold. On the pillow, a single white camellia, dew-fresh. The midnight blue velvet gown hung in the wardrobe, the tear mended, the pearl necklace restrung. Hastings, arriving with sandwiches, stared. "Poirot, she's been here again." "Oui, she tends the manor as she tends the garden." On the dressing table, a child's drawing, crayon crude. A woman in blue, a boy in a sailor suit, a house with camellia windows. Beneath, in a child's scrawl, "Home." Poirot tucked the drawing into his pocket. La famille. The artists had multiplied. Painters, poets, musicians, each with a camellia in their buttonhole. A violinist played a lullaby. A sculptor carved the Countess from marble, the child dissolving into petals at her feet. Poirot addressed the gathering. "Mes amis, The mystery is not solved, it is eternal. The Countess vanished to save her sons. The child vanished to save his mother. The camellias, elles sont la mémoire. A child, a tourist's daughter, tugged his sleeve. Mister, the boy says thank you. She pointed to the serious bower. He's there. With the lady, they're happy. The bower was empty, but the serious bloomed, white and luminous, its scent filling the dome. Alexander's bed had become a grove. The seed from the doll had grown into a tree, its trunk white, its blooms crimson veined with white. Children played beneath it, leaving toys in the roots.